Welcome back to Retirement News Online. You can find more at retirementnewsonline.com. So we're going to talk about estate planning, and it's more than wills and documents. It's really about avoiding costly emotional mistakes that can impact your family for decades. It's in many ways, it's not about money as it is about family. Joining me is Tyler Meek with BayTrust Financial in the People's Republic of Tampa, Florida. Tyler, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, with estate planning, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there from consumers. What are the most common estate planning mistakes that you see?
I mean, there's a lot of mistakes that we see. I would say some of the biggest ones, because let's face it, the whole purpose of having an estate plan is to avoid that pesky probate process that we all hear of. And probate, it takes a long time. It's very costly. Oftentimes assets are frozen. And it's stressful on the family. They're mourning the loss of mom and dad or a loved one. So how can we make it easier transition on them? And a lot of people will hear that probate's bad, and maybe they don't want to take the time to do an estate plan. They put it off. So, a couple of the common errors that I see is, hey, we want to make sure that we leave the house to, little Timmy and little Susie. Let's actually put them on as joint owners on the house. And that solves your probate hole, but at the same time that also opens up a lot of holes for them, both liability and tax-wise. Because they're part owners on the house, they're not going to get what's called that step up in cost basis and be able to sell the property tax-free. So they're going to be responsible for some of those capital gains. And then also, while you're alive, it kind of opens up a little bit of a liability hole for you. Your kids are part owner on your house, they go out and have a night and get into an accident. I mean, we see it all the time. Kids are part owners on houses, something comes up liability wise, and then next thing you know, you're being sued for your own home. So we always say, hey, try not to place kids as actual owners on any of your assets. Really the foolproof way of getting assets to your children or to your heirs is through some form of estate plan, whether it's a will or a trust, and that's a very important conversation that we have with our clients.
And I think some people too maybe make the mistake, they think, well, I don't really have much, I don't really need an estate plan, and they maybe have a will. Mm-hmm. But a trust really solves a lot of the problems that you're talking about, including probate, which can be costly and obviously time consuming. Talk about the difference between a will and a trust.
Yeah, so if there's anything that you want to remember is that the terms will and probate are synonymous. They mean the same exact thing. So if you're using a will as your chosen method to distribute your assets to your beneficiaries upon your passing, that means that you are using that probate process. So how do we avoid that? By establishing a revocable living trust. So the trust, you're establishing it or having an attorney establish for you. And really the biggest misconception, trusts have nothing to do with how much you're worth or how much you have. It's really all to make sure that everything goes seamlessly to your beneficiaries. And it's your rule book. You can make it as cookie cutter, plain and simple as you want, or you can make it really hyper specific in making sure that you're kind of controlling your assets when you're no longer here. But yeah, again, if you're using a will, eventually the assets are going to get to your beneficiaries, but by going through that probate process, it's going to be much more burdening on your beneficiaries by doing it that way. So even though the trust doesn't really provide too much liability protection or anything like that while you're alive, it does give you peace of mind in knowing that when you're no longer here, it's going to make things as seamless as possible for your beneficiaries.
And it's going to happen quicker, obviously.
Exactly.
Probate slows everything down. I've heard somebody call it, do you want the government's plan or do you want your plan? Mm-hmm. And probably your plan is better.
Yeah.
You mentioned beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. Beneficiary designations are often overlooked and forgetful, as maybe there's a divorce, and then all of a sudden there's a death in the family, and we have the improper beneficiaries in there. And you have to, this isn't like set it and forget it. You constantly have to maintain or be vigilant in your estate plan, right?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to doing an estate plan for a client, I mean, we really treat it as if we're having a financial review each year. I mean, we want to make sure that everything is still working in good working order. There is no changes in your health or your kids' health, or, we want to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out. I would say the most important thing to remember too, if you don't do a trust or you don't do an estate plan, obviously, we can have named beneficiaries on everything, whether it be your retirement accounts, IRAs, bank accounts, you name it. if there's a named beneficiary on those accounts, hey, it's payable on death, it's going to your beneficiaries. But it's also important to remember that if you have a named beneficiary on an account, but then you also have them named as the beneficiary on your trust, that named beneficiary that's actually on the account is going to supersede whatever your trust says. So it's really important to make sure that you've got everything in line.
It's fairly complex. And finally, when we're talking about children, special needs trusts are something that are very, very common and very helpful. And you sort of have control on, in many ways, if someone is not, 18 or 21, you can kind of control how you don't want them to just go out and buy a Lamborghini, which could probably happen, but there's some control that you have there, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most standard trust language states that, any beneficiary under the age of 25 is not to receive their inheritance unless for education, support, health. I mean, those are obviously very broad terms. But it is a way of making sure that, kind of like you said, if you have a child who isn't really the most financially responsible, for lack of a better word, they're not just taking mom and dad's money and, like you said, going out and buying a Lamborghini. But yeah, the most important thing really in closing is making sure that you remember that trusts only pass assets that they own. So I would say the most important thing to keep in mind when you're establishing a trust is to make sure that you take the time to retitle the appropriate assets. I always say that you can walk into any estate planning attorney's office, they'll do the nice binder for you, everything tabbed, organized, nice table of contents, but unless you take the time to physically retitle the appropriate assets, I always say that trust becomes nothing more than an expensive paperweight because it owns nothing. Mm-hmm. So you really need to make sure that you take the time to retitle those assets.
And you're talking about funding the trust.
Correct.
So, and attorneys don't typically do that.
I mean, you hope they do. You hope they do, and I say this lightly because I'm not bashing any attorneys out there. But if you do have an attorney establish a trust for you, just make sure that you ask the right questions. Just say, hey, we're establishing this trust. What are the next steps? What do I need to do in order to retitle those assets to make sure that my trust is in good working order? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's just as simple. I mean, everything nowadays is electronic. You can submit a copy of your trust to the necessary institutions or banks. Say, hey, I established a revocable family trust. I want to retitle that account to be owned by my trust. Or another workaround, because let's face it, a lot of banks nowadays don't allow you to retitle the accounts. You may just have to make the trust the beneficiary of the account, which is not out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm. Cool. He's Tyler Meek with BayTrust Financial in Tampa. Obviously, he knows what he's talking about. This is Retirement News Online. If you'd like to find out more about us, go to retirementnewsonline.com. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.